Ki khubor ka bate si TV.
Ka umdi basnyam bat penjas liang. Rupa Premium Meghalaya.
Sophistication meets style. The stylish trendsetter Tata Curve SUV is in town. India's first coupe SUV is now in Shillong.
Ki Nongthohkot bapau jong kari India ki belayo ru bun tri ki khusnam ki lawan poi hanong ba Shillong ban yadan bentalang haka literary festival kabalai sngi kabalalong hanan polong nadu ka khat pratrik hadu ka arpo trik nai wek arajar opsau katu kan ingut na ki Nongthohkot ki bapau ki badan mentah hanong ba Shillong ki kenthop ya Vikram Seth ka Shobhade u Jerry Pinto bat ki wepan u Vikram Seth udai u Nongtho jinge thu khana lingkon u badai ru hagaju apor mulung udai belayo bun tri khusnam ba kenthop nadu ka Padma Shri ka Sahitya Academy Award Pravasi Bharatiya Samman ka WH Smith Literary Award bat ka Crossword Book Award ka Shobhade ka dei ka Nongthohkot ka balajutip kom ka Jackie Collin of India u Jerry Pinto pat udai u Nongtho uba layo ka khusnam Best Book on Cinema Award ula job ru ya ka Windham Campbell Prize House Nam Arajar Khan Rio nalor kata la don lang ginong Thokot bapau nak ni jila brayo bun li khusnam hakari India katau ba kan pham sing nong kendri kini borok ginong Thokot kila sam ya ki jingtip syaki paj ba kumnu bakin sedang ban kelalong ginong Thokot bat ka jingkit jingmut jong ka kot bagi tho ka jing pelong ya kini kata masa jong ka tho katar kala pen mento sisai samla puli jong ka jila ki ba pelet jingmut bat ki basngau tanat ban Thokot namar ba Lyngba kani kata masa ki yo ya kalat ban keli jingkeli bat ban selok bat kini ginong Thokot ki bapau.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to our second session titled For the Love of Travel, which is an exploration of journeys that go beyond the physical realm into the soul-stirring landscapes of stories, adventure, and human connection. We are joined by Sabir Hussein, a passionate adventurer and author of two acclaimed motorcycle travelogues, Battlefield and Paradise, chronicling his solo journey to Ladakh, and Into the East, an epic adventure across northeast India. A former journalist turned travel writer, Sabir combines his love for the written word and his affinity for the Himalayas in stories that capture resilience and human spirit. In conversation with him is David Latplang, a seasoned journalist with over 2 decades of experience in media and communications. A former president of the Shillong Press Club and national executive member of the Indian Journalists Union, Latplang has been a guiding force in shaping the narratives of Northeast India through impactful journalism and media integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please give a warm welcome to Sabir Hussein and David Latplang.
So we got this Bud Desmond. He one hell of a guy. Bud Desmond, I hope you're still here. Thank you so much for your inputs on giving the richness and the culture of our Khasis and so much more. And now it's a little bit more about fun because I'm a journalist, so is he. He decided not to be a journalist anymore until he decided to take a Royal Enfield. Sabir Hussain is a very senior journalist who has worked with the Hindustan Times and with many media houses, and he's done a lot of crazy stuff. He's good at the desk and he's also good at the bike. So when he was 48 years old, he decided to take a trip to Ladakh. And that's when he first wrote his book,
Yeah.
Paradise and Battlefields.
Battlefields and Paradise. Other way,
Absolutely.
battlefields in paradise.
And then he's from the northeast, he's from Guwahati, and then he came back, rode another bike, and it's beautiful, into the east. And I don't know for what reason, but you made chapter 10 very long.
Yeah, that's all about Meghalaya, and I had a lovely time riding through Meghalaya, through different places. I mean,
Okay.
wonderful.
So let's just do this, because there are a lot of lovely young people here. I can see them. There are keen writers too, a little bit interested. Now Abha is there, and tell me, how did you get into? How did you want to do motorcycling?
Well, motorcycling had always been a passion, but somehow for many years I did not find the opportunity to go on rides. Then sometime in 1998 in Delhi, I was out of the blue. There's a motorcycle club called the Pathfinders. So they were planning a ride to Ladakh, and they were one-man short. So someone suggested my name, and they came over and asked me. So and I just jumped at the opportunity. So I became a part of the club. I stayed with them till 2008. Went to Ladakh about 8 times with them. But then, and that's how it stuck. Though, so while Ladakh was great to ride through Kashmir, sometimes through Manali. But I had always wanted to do the Northeast because I am from it and from this side, and I think the challenges of riding across the Northeast are a little different than riding through Kashmir or Ladakh. So that's how I never quite looked back after 1998.
How did you choose the motorcycle? How did you choose the Royal Enfield? Because there are a lot of guys here, like Royal Enfield is a very popular thing.
Royal Enfield because, when I was riding to Ladakh, I had a Suzuki. I had a smaller bike. I rode it to death. I rode it for about 12 years or something, then before I scrapped it. So when I started the Northeast ride, which had been on my mind for a very long time, I did not have a motorcycle at that time. And I wasn't willing to invest a couple of lakhs to buy a Royal Enfield Himalayan to go on the ride. So I asked the Royal Enfield corporate communication boss if he could lend me a bike for 3 months. I didn't quite expect it, but I was really surprised when he said, of course we can lend you one. Awesome. They were very kind enough to ship the bike from Chennai to Delhi, where I picked it up. I put it in the train to Siliguri. And then I came to Siliguri, picked up the bike, and then I started the ride.
Okay, so from Siliguri. So then you traversed the whole of Northeast.
Much of it. I started from Sikkim, then came down to travel through Assam, and then Arunachal. I had to make 3 trips because in one pass they won't let you travel the whole state. I came back, then I did Meghalaya, then went to Silchar, crossed over to Manipur, spent a few days there, then rode across to Nagaland. And then rode back to Guwahati.
Okay, so cool. So when you went to Ladakh, did you plan to write a book about it, or was just a ride and then the whole thing about writing a book as a journalist came into being?
No, it happened like when I was part of Pathfinders. I mean, the rides were very hectic. Like we had because it was a large group and people had problems with leaves. So somebody had, say some people could spend just about 10 days on the ride. So our stoppages were very calibrated. Like one day here, point A, one day, point B, one day. So it was more about riding than interacting with local people or imbibing local cultures and interacting with locals. So that didn't really although I wanted to write about it, but I didn't really have enough matter that I could really write about, because I honestly didn't have that much of interaction. So when I finally left that group in 2008 and I decided to go solo in 2013, was that when I found I had the extremely enriching experience, and I did not take normally if you go to Ladakh from Delhi, you take the Jammu-Srinagar highway and then go. So I decided to take an alternative route, which is through the Mughal road, from Rajouri to Shopia and then Srinagar and then Leh and all. So that, and then onwards to Turtuk, which is the last Indian village in the extreme north. So that trip was so enriching. I thought, why not write about it? But even then, before I sat for that trip, how Battlefields in Paradise came to be written was also quite interesting. In the sense, I was sometime in April of 2013. I was driving my wife to her office. So suddenly a schoolboy on a bicycle, he is riding down on the wrong side of the road, and then he crosses diagonally, almost comes in front of my car. So I swerved not to hit him. So, and I just told my wife, this is what happens when common sense takes leave. So she said, that's such a wonderful phrase you used to describe something. So why don't you write a book? I said, the book I want to write, you won't let me write, because I have to go solo and you are against me writing solo. So then on the spur of the moment, she said, no, you go, I won't stop you. So which is how I went.
And then decided. So when you got into Ladakh, did you feel that you were going to write about it, or it just came off the trip, and at the end of it, then you decided that, okay.
No, not at the end of it. I think I made the decision somewhere in the middle of it. When I was traveling from Srinagar to Leh, and I got caught in a massive, in torrential rain. I was drenched to the skin. I was shivering like a leaf in a tree, and then I took shelter in a small hotel where the tea shop owner was very kind enough to serve me some really warm, hot meals. Then he took off my gloves and says, let me dry it for you. So he put it on he had a huge stove run by fire, fueled by firewood. He dried my gloves. He gave me my dry gloves back in the rain and all. So, and I thought the hospitality, a totally unknown person, helping me out so much. And then it has happened. Along the route, I have met some such people. So then I thought, okay, I better write about it.
So essentially, when you were 48 when you decided to take that trip, and so you went to Ladakh, and what you met there, and you were a journalist then. Was it really what's happening on the ground? Was it real, or was our reportage not really nice enough?
I did find differences, not as much in Ladakh as in Kashmir, because when I was planning the trip, I was warned, don't go. Many of my well-wishers said, don't go. It's a dangerous place to go, and certainly not alone. If something happens to you, it will be very difficult for your family and all. But then I thought, no, let me find out firsthand. I'm a journalist myself. There are other journalists who are reporting from Kashmir and all. So I went, and I did find a difference in the sense that things were not as bad as I thought when I was reading the newspaper reports or watching television. It's not that somebody was just waiting to ambush you or kidnap you. No, there was nothing like that. There was security. got frisked at a lot of checkpoints. But that was that. And then during the Northeast ride, when I was the day I crossed over to Myanmar for a short while, and on the way back, I stopped at a restaurant in Moreh. So I had lunch. Then I chatted up the restaurant owner when I went to pay him. And he told me something 6 years ago, which now looks like he had so much of foresight. He said, I asked him about, because there's heavy security deployment in Moreh. So I was asking about security deployment. He said, insurgency is not as much a problem in Manipur as the question of ethnic undercurrents. And he told me, and I've written in my book, he told me so, I mean, as if he saw the future. He said, once trouble starts, army flag marches won't calm down the situation. The government needs to do something before it blows up. And 6 years on, I mean, whatever he said sounds so true now. But what struck me was that 6 years ago, we wouldn't have read much in newspapers or heard in any other news that Manipur is sitting on a powder keg of sorts. Most media reports were talking about the massive infrastructure drive going on in Manipur, roads, bridges, railheads, and all those are good. We need development, but it beats me that how did we as journalists 6 years ago missed these warning signs that some big trouble could happen.
Bad was happening. So, if you look at it, Manipur, obviously, Meghalaya, since you focused a lot, what did you see about Meghalaya?
Frankly, I loved Meghalaya. Starting from the ride from Guwahati, and I did mention in the book that I think it's one of the best. At least in 2018, it was one of the best roads to ride. I mean, it's a motorcyclist's delight. You twist and turn and enough open stretches to speed up and all those things. I loved the hospitality everywhere that I went. It started with the guest house owner in Sora, and frankly, I didn't know Cherrapunji was largely called Sora now, so I kept looking for, when I was entering Shillong, I was looking for signages for Cherrapunji. I did not see any. I kept seeing Sora, so I finally stopped somewhere and asked. She said, oh, Cherrapunji's name has changed to Sora. So that's how I find out. Now this guest house where I stayed, I mean, I'll never forget his hospitality in the sense, the day I was leaving, I had to leave early morning for Dauki. So this young man who was running the guest house, he told me that he would be leaving at night because he wasn't staying in the guest house. He has a house nearby, so he just goes and sleeps the night there. So I was making the payment. That time he didn't have UPI, so, and he didn't have change. He said, I can't pay you back 200 rupees, whatever was the difference. So he let me go off without paying 800 rupees because I told him that 1 month later I'm coming back with my wife and kid, which I did. So, I mean, he was a total stranger. He trusted me. He said, okay, when you come back next time, you make the payment. I did that, but I can't imagine somebody else, it happening in some other parts of the country who would let me go without paying him 800 rupees.
So that was one of your the best experiences.
Yeah. Then I also had this long meeting with Lou Majo in Shillong. I had asked him for 20 minutes. I ended up speaking to him for 90 minutes. Enthralling. I mean, I just loved that conversation. It just went on and on and on. I mean, he also didn't realize time was running out. It was a great time. I had a lovely time riding to Dauki, then to Shnonpadeng.
So tell me something, you're 52 now.
Was when I started that role in 2018. I was
So
53.
is motorcycling actually on a Royal Enfield, isn't it a bit of a challenge for like a person of that
my
age?
age.
Yeah.
Depends. I mean, if you are physically fit, that shouldn't be a problem. But there have been times when I wish I was younger, particularly in 2018 during the ride from. I was traveling from Teju to Walong in Arunachal. I was headed for India's two easternmost villages, Kibitu and Kaho. Now, much of the road from Walong to from Teju to Walong was atrocious. I mean, there was virtually no road for much of the distance, and it was just rocks, more rocks, and water crossings, and they had scrapped off the mountains to build a new road or widen the road. Red soil, slippery, watery. And then, Royal Enfield had a very good tag for the Himalayan. It said, built for all roads, built for no roads. So that tag really, the bike really lived up to that tag, carried me through. But I did end up riding at night, which I really hate. So in those kind of situations, I really wished I was younger, but I mean, and stretches from Imphal to Kohima, stretches of that highway was also terrible. And then from Kohima to Okha, they were laying new roads. So it was just full of rocks and more rocks as far as you can see. So, yeah, it was...
So, Sabir, like as a journalist, then you're riding a bike, you're traveling the country, you're seeing most of the country in its completely pristine sense. Any of it that we reported as journalists, was it real, that's happening on the ground that you see? Like for instance, Ladakh, Kashmir, whatever was reported in mainstream media, was it really happening, or was it just a facade?
No, it was largely happening, but what happened was sometimes like I said about Manipur, where we missed warning signs of reporting. I mean, I think we should have, as journalists, people should have reported, then there's danger ahead, which we missed. But largely what happens was reportage of what has happened is more or less okay. I mean, what has happened, you can't change it. But to put things in perspective, or what it could mean in the future, what ramifications such kind of events would have, I think that point has largely been missed, whether it was in Kashmir or in the Northeast. Like I'll tell you one thing, in Nagaland I met a group of people in Okha. I just finished lunch, I was going out towards Mokokchung. That's casual conversation, which very aware youngsters, and they were pretty miffed that the government's, the center's push for an agreement with the NSCN hasn't yet, come to a final stage. And they were very aware. They said, see, if this government is just trying to mollify Nagas with this kind of thing, as a carrot and stick policy, or not even a carrot and stick policy, it's like trying to put up a pretense that it wants peace, but hasn't been able to stitch together a final agreement. He said, no, that could be dangerous. And if you see, I mean, I think last week, there's this interview of NSCN chief, Muiva, saying, is it Muiva? Yeah, I think it was Muiva, was saying, who's warning that NSCN could break the ceasefire once again.
Yeah, that was last week. So tell me something, Sabir. A lot of young kids here, and I don't know for what reason, but Royal Enfield is quite a favorite here in Geelong.
Yeah, I've seen
I
that.
can see all of them Royal Enfields,
Yeah.
all different types of variants.
Yes.
How difficult is it to ride and then ride a journey and write about the journey?
That bike is a very user-friendly bike. So, and modern Royal Enfields are much better than what they used to make, say, 15, 20 years ago. Very good quality build. They take you through thick and thin. That's the hardware part of it. Now, when you write a book about travel, I mean, what happens is you have a blueprint. You have something in your mind. Okay, I will travel from point A to B, and then to C and D. I'll do this. I will do that. I'll meet so and so, and then I'll write. You don't have to think about, not like fiction that you have to conjure up a plot to keep readers hooked. So by the time you finish a write, you already have the experience. You have to write. But what happens is, even if you plan a ride and you plan your itinerary of what you would want to ride, sometimes say you have planned to meet somebody in a particular place, a local person of importance. So when you reach that place, he may not be there, he or she may not be there for some whatever reasons. You may want to visit a place, and then you find out at the last moment that you were not allowed to visit. It happened with me when I was in Arunachal Pradesh. I crossed Jairampur. I was heading to see I was heading to the Pangsu Pass in the India-Myanmar border. So I had to take a pass from Jairampur, in Jairampur, from either the army or the, I think there's this SDO there. But the Assam Rifles told me, if the civil officer gives you one, we'll give you one. Then I went to check with him. So he says, sorry, there's a change in protocol. We have orders from the center that outsiders are not allowed now to go to Pangsu. So that was a big disappointment. So that is those things you have to keep in mind, somebody, if you're planning to write a travel book.
Yeah, so does this become a bit of a challenge for you when you're trying to figure out and how to conceptualize and put it into words? And then these challenges, how much did they actually impede you?
Depends on at what stage you face these challenges. In my case, like this Pangsu Pass thing happened when I was in the middle of the trip. So then I had enough, because I still had enough distance to cover. I still had enough places to see. So I could make up for that, for missing Pangsu and not able to see the other side of Myanmar on that side. So I made for that shortcoming or my misfortune by doing the trip to More and then crossing over to Myanmar. So if I was lucky in that way, otherwise I think you have to make the best with what you have got to write about.
And when you finished your trip, what was your bestest takeaway that you had from Ladakh as well as from here? Then as a journalist, because you were a journalist when you started, you were a journalist when you took that ride, you were a journalist when you said, I'll go to Ladakh before I touch 50. So obviously you took that ride and the story unfolded, but what were your takeaways when you came to the Northeast, into the East?
See, David, my takeaways have been the wonderful memories that I have made and that wonderful adventures I have had. I mean, it's like a different feeling when you suddenly find yourself get caught in either in torrential rain in a place like Sonamarg, it's bitterly cold, or you get caught in a snowstorm climbing Khardungla Pass, uh, or you get trapped in some other place in Ladakh because of in Kashmir because of a landslide, and you are stranded until help arrives in the form of an outmover from the Border Road Organization to clear the mess for you, so before you can travel. And then the friendships that you forge, that you make. And I have discovered one thing, that if you are on a motorcycle, you make friends more easily than if you do if you're in a car. So,
No one here who likes to ride motorcycles. There's no riders.
so there's one there.
Oh,
Is
there's
there-
one there.
So, so the memories the memories are the best takeaways. You know, I met during Northeast ride, I met Tenzing Hillary's son in Darjeeling. Such a humble soul. He is an Everestier himself. The memories of meeting him, or meeting a steam train driver in Darjeeling. I met a 1962 veteran in Tawang. I went to Kigwema village in outside Kohima. I looked up the house where the Japanese general commander, General Sato, during the Second World War stayed in the house. It is still there, still stands as it was. It's changed hands a few times. So this kind of memories, you know, they're going to last a lifetime, and no one can take them away from me. I mean, and the fact that I achieved what I wanted to do, whether it was on the right side of 50 or the wrong side of 50, I did what I wanted to do. So I have no regrets in my old age. That I won't have that regret in my old age, that I wanted to do something and I didn't do when I had the time.
Absolutely awesome. Are there any journal students here, or writers, or anybody? If you would like to talk to Sabir. So Sabir has been a very dear friend. He was with the Hindustan Times, and we worked together. And he's traveled, and he's used his passion for motorcycling to actually discover and to actually render knowledge. Because when I read chapter 10 of Sabir's book,
Into the East.
it was kind of into the east. It was kind of interesting what he saw and what he described. It was just like you and me. It's not a journalistic parlance or anything. It's just you and me. If you guys want to read, or if there are anyone who wish to ask anything about his experience, especially the writer.
Yeah, it's just a general question, because you have been traveling solo, and especially in the Northeast, there's a lot of language barrier, right? So how did you face that, and how did you navigate through that?
Frankly, I didn't find a language barrier. I mean, I speak Assamese. I understand a little bit of Bengali. I can speak a little bit of Bengali. So Hindi, English, of course, carried me through. I mean, you won't believe the kind of language issues I had was with people you wouldn't expect. I mean, I was stopped at a checkpost in Arunachal Pradesh. They were the Maratha Light Infantry people. The funny thing was, my motorcycle had a Tamil Nadu number plate, and this soldier from the Marathi Light Infantry, he was a Tamil. So the moment he saw my motorcycle, he started speaking to me in Tamil. Finally, I had to tell him, "Chill, bro. I'm not Tamil. I can't speak." So then, and then the day I was riding into Shillong from Guwahati, I parked the bike outside the lake. What's that lake? Barapani. So the moment I stopped the bike, there were two other bikes behind me. much younger people, 3 people on 2 bikes. Though they come in and they go ahead and park somewhere else. So suddenly the youngest of the lot, they comes running to me. He says, "Sir, are you from Chennai?" I said, "No." Then I told him, "You must be from Chennai." He said, "Yeah, yeah." So I saw your number plate, so I thought you must be from Chennai. So that's how, and of all places, in Imphal, I stopped to ask for a direction. Another Emeti person, he also asked me, "Are you from Chennai?" He starts talking in Tamil. I said, "How do you know Tamil?" He said, "No, I worked in Chennai for a few years. So I saw your number plate. I thought you were a Tamil." So that's how. I didn't have problem with it. Otherwise, speaking to locals around here, and no.
Hi, Sabir.
Hi.
Nabina here. I'm
Yeah,
your
yeah.
former colleague
Yes.
from the Sentinel.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so good to see you up on the
You
stage
too.
and talking about your book. When I knew you back then, and I keep telling my friends that I never thought that Sabir Hussein will be the biker type. I don't know what is the biker type, but at that time, you were talking about journalism students. At that time, I was a journalism intern, right? A very young person working for the Sentinel, and you were already there as a reporter. So now that I see this transformation, I'm curious, like what made you love this whole idea of travel? See, biker type I'm bringing in not just as a stereotype, that at a certain age, people or men like to, do it, as we see in so many countries around the world. But what brought you to the love of travel and document it? So what would you tell journalism students here? Consider me as the person from the past asking you. So just curious.
Navina, I had always loved traveling, but what really fired my imagination was I think sometime in the late 80s. I was either in the last year of college or I had just passed or must have just gotten into Sentinel. I read Vikram Seth's book, From Heaven Lake. I don't know if you have read it. It's a fabulous overland trip from China to Kathmandu before he takes the flight to Delhi. So that fired my imagination, so I always thought, okay, someday I'll also write a travel book, but frankly at that time I had no idea where I would travel, from where to where, and what would I write about actually. So, and then when I became a journalist, of course, the idea of writing a book went into cold storage for quite some time because you know how it was like in journalism, and too hectic always. Then when I shifted to Delhi, it was even worse. Pressure cooker of an atmosphere in Press Trust of India or other places where I worked. So what happens, like I said earlier, I told David earlier, there was this motorcycle club which was looking for a person to fill up their group. So which is when it happened. I had always wanted to travel on a motorcycle. So when the opportunity came, I sort of grabbed it with both hands, and then I decided, okay, I went with Pathfinders for quite a few years, and then I decided, okay, it's better to ride solo, so you can stop wherever you want, you can see whatever you want to see, talk to whoever you want without having to wait for, worry about the rest of the gang or delaying the rest of the gang for writing. And as a writer, as a traveler and a writer, I make it a point that when I travel, I don't see myself as a tourist. I see myself as a traveler who I don't expect 5-star treatment everywhere where I stay. Not that I afford 5-star hotels, but I prefer to stay in more humble accommodation, in homestays. Like I told you about the Cherrapunji experience, I had wonderful homestay. In Kohima also I had wonderful relationships. But I try to imbibe the local culture, the local, the spirits of the people and all those things. Spend time with the people, so that sort of enriches your experience a lot, and they help you make memories. I mean, something, I could tell my grandchildren, okay, I did this, I met so and so someday when they all grow up.
Hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon, sir.
Please sit down, ma'am. Don't have to stand.
Okay, no problem, sir. I want to ask you one question because you are telling about traveling, etc. So I also very much fond of traveling. I have already traveled lots of countries in the world, but I want to know how will you define a traveler and tourist?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
See, I mean, I don't mean to offend anybody who calls himself or herself a tourist. I mean, I've been a tourist also a few times. But what happens is, when you are a tourist, you have an itinerary. You will go today you will see this and that and that and that. And you are in a rush to rush from point A to point B to point C. And end of the day, maybe by a bonfire by the hotel where you will be staying. And all things. It's a little different when you are a traveler. You can choose to do whatever you want with your time. Like in my case, the day I went to visit a veteran of the 1962 war in Tawang, I had to hunt for him. I overshot his house. Then somebody guided me back to his house, and also I had planned to meet him for a short time, then come back to Tawang. He was living a little outside. I mean, he was living near the monastery, and I was staying in the town. So that meeting stretched quite a lot, and I had gone to see him late afternoon. By the time I left, it was evening. So because I saw myself as a traveler at that time, I didn't have to go to somewhere else, and I had set myself, okay, this is the man I need to talk to know his experiences, what it was like in 1962 under an occupation army, of what life was like, and when the Chinese moved into Tawang. Such a rich conversation I had with him. If you were a tourist, maybe you wouldn't have been able to spend that much of time because you would have something else to see up later in the day. So that's how I make the distinction.
Are there any further questions from the audience?
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I wanted to ask a question that what would you be the advice, what would you give advice to us youngsters, especially the female? Like, suppose I love traveling a lot, then what would you give advice for me to travel solo, or what are the precautions, or...
On a motorcycle?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm really happy you asked me this question.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll just tell you what. Just follow your dreams. Ride safe. Stick to your and preferably try not to ride it after sunset, because it can get very tricky at sometimes if you get caught in a place where you are far from any kind of civilization. Or maybe what happens is if you are in the outback, your nearest help will be maybe quite at some distance away. So try to make your journey from point A to point B, always between sunrise and sunset. Ride safely, be kind, be generous to others, respect local customs, and don't get mad at trivial if things go wrong with the locals, because who knows, they may be going through worse than you are. But if you follow your dreams, you will follow your heart, you will really enjoy your ride, and sometimes I can tell you from my experience that the sound of the motorcycle exhaust is the sweetest sound you will hear. And for me personally, long distance motorcycle has worked as a therapy. So I hope when you do it, it will work for you too.
This will be the last question for this session.
Good morning, sir. Another question that I had in mind was when you talked about your travels, how do you differentiate between writing as a journalist and writing for a book? Because there was one book that I read, The Motorcycle Diaries. I'm sure you've heard of the book by Che Guevara. So when I read the book, it felt like he was writing a book, but then his experience were very much from a journalist's point of view. I'm not really sure how he went about doing the book, but then from your experiences, how do you differentiate between writing as a journalist and writing for a book?
No, I don't focus much on being a journalist when I write a book. When I have written these two books, I use my journalistic knowledge to make the book more interesting with nuggets of information that normal people may not have. Like when I wrote the wrote Battlefields and Paradise, I mentioned things like I was crossing Jozila Pass, and I mentioned that Jozila Pass was the site of the world's highest tank battle in 1948 when we drove out Pakistani intruders. I mean, not everybody would know about it. So things like that, and a place like Turtuk, which we wrested from Pakistan in 1971. Many people would think it had always been a part of India, and that we didn't have to fight to take it back. So this kind of things. I mean, I try to put my journalistic instincts on the back burner. I write about my experiences. I use, as far as journalism is concerned, I use my knowledge to supplement when I'm writing about, when I mention ground situation in a particular area vis-a-vis what is being reported in the media and all those things. That's how I do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause for our speakers? That was quite an exciting rendezvous. Thank you, Mr. Sabir and Ba David, for taking us on a journey.
Welcome.
Wherein the road was a very thrilling voyage into the heart of storytelling. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to present the mementos to you.
Thank you.
This session is titled A Suitable Author, Reading and Reminiscences. For our session this evening, we revisit the monumental work of an author whose epic tale on the intersection of personal and societal narratives is one of the most celebrated in Indian literature, capturing the social and personal dynamics of post-independence India, spanning cities and generations, whose work, A Suitable Boy, remains one of the most evocative portrayals of love, identity, and post-independence societal change in Indian literature. For this session, I am honored to welcome Vikram Seth, a celebrated Indian writer and poet. As an award-winning author, Vikram Seth is known for his sprawling narrative on post-colonial India, delving into love, familial relationships, and societal changes. He has received numerous accolades for his contributions to literature, including the Padma Shri and the SARC Literary Award in 2011. Moderating this session, we are joined by Ms. Malvika Banerjee, who is a woman of many hats, a journalist, an entrepreneur, and the founder and director of the Kolkata Literary Meet, whose work celebrates dialogue and reflection of the multitude of politics, social issues, and cultural events. Her insightful analysis and compelling storytelling have made her a prominent voice in Indian media, particularly highlighting the nuances of life in Calcutta and the broader social cultural landscapes of India. Let us give a round of applause once again to Vikram Seth and Ms. Malvika Banerjee.
So in the season of cherry blossoms, we are all gilding the lilies. So there is nothing much I can say about Vikram which hasn't been said before. we were 17 or 18 in the late 1980s when we read this book in verse, which is about a few lost souls in San Francisco and their love, their friendship, their disappointments and their triumphs became ours. So from that moment onwards, it's been a wonderful journey of 35 years with Vikram, first knowing him as an author and then knowing Vikram Seth in all his wonderful multitudinous avatars. So thank you, Vikram, and tell us how you came here in a Jimny.
I came here in a Jimny. First of all, thank you, all of you, for being here, and Malvika as well. I came here because of you, as you well know. I don't normally do, does it sound all right? Can you hear me? Okay, it sounds very sort of cavernous and resonant to me. But as long as it sounds okay to you, that's fine. So what happened was that Malvika heard that I was floating about the Northeast. So she, who had not succeeded in getting me to her own literary meet in Calcutta, because I really don't attend literary festivals, she said, well, why don't you come to this place? It's got lots of cherry blossoms. It's got a totally eccentric chief minister who sings.
I didn't say that.
Well, she implied it. And she said that if you survive the driving here, then they'll welcome you with open arms and broken legs. So that's how I came here. What happened was that last year, yes, I don't know where to begin this story. It goes back quite far. Last year, that's not for suspense, that's just because I needed to wet my whistle. Last year, I bought a Jimny. Now, a Jimny is not an old man's car, and I'm old. It's a young man's car. But when I went to the Polo showrooms, Volkswagen, I guess, to change my rickety car, which was now 12 or 13 years old, they had a number of nice cars, but none of them was in the kind of red color that I liked. They had a red. It was a sort of, I'm sorry to say, but it was what is known as a cherry red or cerise, which is not this lovely pink color, but a kind of dark maraschino cherry, sort of dark, slightly depressing color. I knew every time I stepped into the car, I'd get depressed. So I looked around for red cars, and a friend of mine said, look, I've ordered 2 Polos. I said, two Jimnys. I said, what's a Jimny? You mean a gypsy? He said, no, there's a new car, Jimny. Why didn't you ride in one of them? And if you like it, fine. So I rode in it, and I liked it, and I liked the color. And then the car kidnapped me. What happened was that I wanted to go to the Valley of Flowers. An old teacher of mine had died, and he'd always told me to go to the Valley of Flowers, and I never had. And after his death at the age of 90-something, I said, for Gurudiyal Singh, I am going to go. And I began the journey. The Alaknanda was flooded, there were problems in getting across, and little Jimny pointed towards Badrinath. And so my driver, who's kind of slightly dharmic, he said, why don't we go there, Sahab? So I said, all right. And then there were a number of landslides, because the Valley of Flowers is really only in bloom in July and August, the sort of height of the monsoon. And a number of landslides later, I was forced to go to Kedarnath because I couldn't get back home, and then to Gangotri, and finally to Yamunotri. So, in the wrong order, of course, you're supposed to take the water of the Jamna and the Ganga, and then lay it at the feet of Kedar and Badri, Shivji and Vishnu. So that was the first kidnap. I got back home, I said, now I can relax. But before I knew it, the Jimny had taken me around the west, and then to the south, all the way to Rameshwaram and back again. And finally, I said, I've had enough. I've got a novel to write. I'm not going to put up with your wiles. And I phoned a friend. I said, I'll go to the east sometime next year. Can you give me a bit of advice? He said, what are you doing in the next 5 days? So I said, I'm writing my novel. And his reaction was, I am going to Arunachal Pradesh. I've been asked to do a number of photographs for a book for the governor. Why don't you come along? You'll see parts of the country that you've never seen before, that you won't get access to. So I spent 2 weeks in Arunachal Pradesh about 4 weeks ago. And then where does the Jimny come in? I couldn't have 3 journeys with the Jimny and 1 without. So I summoned the Jimny with my driver from Delhi, and he met me in Dibrugarh, and then we went through Nagaland, through Arunachal, through Tripura and Agartala, through Mizoram, then to a state that I was sought to be dissuaded not to go from going to, Manipur. But we went to Churachandpur, or Lamka, as they call it there, to Kangpokpi and to Moreh, also of course to Imphal, and finally back through Dimapur to Shillong via Assam. So having been in a state of some alarm when I was in Manipur, but also great interest, and it's also a horribly moving experience seeing what people are suffering from there. I've come to a place where it's all cherry blossoms, and I suppose I could be dissolved by the rain at Sora or trampled by the rhinoceroses of Kaziranga, but those threats are comparatively minor. And the Jimny, or Jimny Mata, or Jimny Devi, as I reverentially call her, has taken me north, south, east, north, southwest, and now east. It's a long answer, not a very literary answer, but a factual one to that question.
So most literature happens, yes, exactly, we require that, yeah.
I consider that applause to be applause for my incredibly, and my wonderful car, of course, but my intrepid driver, Vinay Pratap Singh, who's probably not here, but you can have a round of applause for him as well.
Wonderful. So now we leave your Jimny parked wherever it is near your hotel.
It's parked in front of the hotel, resting, breathing, while I'm taken around by an Innova.
Yes. So now we shall travel back in time with no particular car or model or color and go to Golden Gate.
From my Vahan to something quite different.
To your Itihas. Yeah. So, I was talking about the Golden Gate, and that was when you just sprung into public memory and the public imagination was caught by this story, which no one could imagine was written by an Indian. It could have been written by anyone who lived in San Francisco at that time. And I remember you saying this at your first appearance at the Kolkata Literary Meet, and only one of 2, that you were happiest when somebody in San Francisco said, this is authentic to my life. And that to you is the greatest testament to an author's imagination, when it resonates with the person or the people it speaks about. So the session is called Readings and Reminiscences. So do you need to really read it, or do you know it offhand? The matrimonial ad for John Brown.
Oh, for John Brown, the matrimonial ad. This is before the internet, so you would advertise in the newspapers for a mate. And John's loyal ex-girlfriend, Janet, seeing that he's sort of not come down in life exactly, but he's depressed perpetually, she doesn't want to hitch up with him again, but she wants to find a mate for him. So, what does she? Yes. She meets John at a Chinese restaurant, and she says, "It's sad to see you look so lonely." That's all, John. John does not confute Jan's passionate words. He thinks if only things were that simple. Moved and mute, he sits and stares as little bubbles fizz in his beer and his grand troubles just dissolve. Well, I'm a lucky man to have a true friend like you, Jan. You may be right, but if I do it, who knows what sort of person I'll wind up with. He attempts to smile, but fails. He sighs, I can't pursue it. I'm sorry that I'm such a pain. It simply goes against my grain. So Janet advertises on his behalf. But what does she, what is her ad? She's sitting with her 2 cats, Cuff and Link. Sated with requisite nutrition, they eye her milk and Weetabix as she reads out her composition. Young, handsome, yappy, 26, straight, forward, sociable but lonely, cannot believe that he's the only well-rounded and well-meaning square lusting for love. If you out there are friendly, female, under 30, impulsive, fit and fun, let's meet. Be rash. Box blank. Cuff off that sheet. It's just been typed and now it's dirty. I guess your paw prints, the cat's purr, can serve in place of signature. But earlier she'd said to John, when he says, yes, he's complaining. He says, I'm young, employed, healthy, ambitious, sound, solvent, self-made, self-possessed, but all my symptoms are pernicious. The Dow Jones of my heart's depressed. The sunflower of my youth is wilting. The tower of my dreams is tilting. The zoom lens of my zest is blurred. The drama of my life's absurd. What is the root of my neurosis? I jog, eat brewer's yeast each day, and yet I feel life slip away. I wait your sapient diagnosis. I die, I faint, I fail, I sink. You need a lover, John, I think. That's what Jan says to him.
So you thought about a term that is now quite prevalent, the quarter life crisis.
I didn't realize there was such a thing. Of course, a quarter life crisis, since John is 26, is not a 10 quarter. It's like a 5 quarter. But they say that 100 is the new 20.
So has anyone told you that the Golden Gate in some ways, I mean, it's on the other coast, but Friends is also has the same. Has anyone said this to you?
Yes, they've said it's a kind of glorified literary soap about the Golden Gate. But they've said the same thing about A Suitable Boy. I don't take it as an insult at all. I like soaps.
No, well, I didn't quite mean it as an insult. What I meant it
of course you didn't.
What I meant is this whole thought of 5 young people trying to find love in a bustling metropolis. You thought of it before Chuck and whoever else.
Yes, and that girl, Janice with the nasal voice, and the one who was smelly cat or scaredy cat?
Phoebe, yes.
Phoebe. Yeah, well, I quite enjoyed that. But, yes, but my coast is the West Coast when it comes to the United States. I spent 11 years there in the economics department not getting a PhD. So that's my coast for view.
But there's something about those who don't get their PhDs and their MBAs
well, I've got
from
some
Harvard.
PhDs. I've got dishonest PhDs, the ones that people throw at you. But no, I haven't got a PhD in economics.
Yes, he was at Stanford, if it counts for anything. So, going on from there to poetry, you went back into, and is it a collection of something you'd written earlier, or you wrote at the same time, All You Who Sleep Tonight?
Yes, I'd self-published a book of poems, mappings, because, I couldn't get any publishers, so I just thought, well, I'll publish it myself. And I published it in the States first, and then I got something which is quasi-self-publishing, the great Pilal, who has launched so many writers, but you have to pay to get published. Of course, he had to. That's the only way he could, make a going of it. The next book of lyric poems was The Humble Administrator's Garden. And I've written more books of poetry than I have of fiction or prose, really. And I do see myself at heart as a poet.
I was going to come to that later. So why do you say that? Why? Because you've written these 2 much-loved novels, one in verse, admittedly, and then there is A Suitable Boy. And there is also an Equal Music, which is, according to many, the best novel you've written. Yes. So why would you say that you see yourself primarily as a poet?
I find prose very hard work. I find fiction very hard work. And the creation of characters and stories and so on. It's not. I've always thought it's not exactly my métier, except that I find it is. With poetry, there's a great pleasure. You know, when you've written a certain stanza or a verse form, there's a kind of a joy, a click, where the rhyme and the meter and everything fit in together. With prose, it's always unfinished. You could take out a few sentences and put a few in, and it would be fine. Whereas with poetry, if you just change the month from April to May, your rhyme will go wrong. There's a kind of rightness about it and a memorability to it. In prose, say for example, A Suitable Boy, all I can remember is the first sentence. You too will marry a boy I choose, said Mrs. Rupa Mehra firmly to her younger daughter. But ask me to quote a single other line in that fat book, I wouldn't be able to. With poetry, yeah, I could quote stuff.
Would you also say that you love words, that you love the play of words and the sense of what they can do with meter as well as what they can do with rhyme and a double meaning and, the whole architecture of a poem somehow draws you to it more deeply because of your love for words?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, no, sorry. You want me to elaborate on that?
You know, you've done acrostic poems.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true.
There's a poem in A Suitable Boy where each verse says Lata, Lata,
Oh,
Lata.
yeah, the two
Lata.
characters are, Amit writes this to his inamorata, Lata, L-A-T-A. And the first letters spell L-A-T-A. It's called an acrostic. Yeah, so I like that kind of stuff. But, I mean, eventually, the feeling of a poem doesn't lie in its technique. It lies in its emotional content, or how it can move people. Because poetry really is there to amuse or console or evoke or to make one think. And the technique should be there, but well hidden, I think. Similarly, with a novel, if you've done a lot of research into a particular subject or a particular period, in order to make it real, especially to the people who've experienced that. Malvika mentioned earlier that I thought that my book would be a failure, even if everyone praised it. But say a musician thought you were playing on the wrong string in unequal music, or a San Franciscan thought it didn't ring true, or a person who lived through the Nehruvian era in Indian life felt that somehow it didn't ring true. So again, you do a lot of research, you talk to a lot of people, but then you've got to remove the research from it. You've got to scrub that out of it. Otherwise, it's a dissertation, not a novel. And no one likes being preached to or taught within the four corners of a novel.
So do you think you can now read us one? If I've pulled out a couple of poems,
sure.
Anthologies, so whichever.
Well, All You Sleep Tonight. That is one poem I can remember by heart. Something else. Sure. Here you are. A Style of Loving. Okay. You know, how about one that's in words of one syllable?
Okay.
I've got All You Sleep Tonight here. This is a poem that I spent 2 years in China doing research in economics and demography. And one of the reasons I did that was because I wanted to go to China to where some of my favorite poets lived, Wang Wei, Du Fu, and Li Bai. And so I learned from the Chinese style of classical poetry to write poetry in words of one syllable. And here's a poem called Walk. That's interesting. Do you think that's a metaphor for my relationship to Shillong? It might be. An adhesive tendency. walk. I walked last night with my old friend past the old house where we first met, past each known bush and each known bend. The moon shone and the path was wet. No one passed by us as we strolled at our sad ease, though hand in hand we did not speak. Our hands grew cold, yet we walked on as we had planned. We did not deal in words or tears. At the dead light we did not rage. What change had crept through our forked years, we did not have the will to gauge. The lights went out. Who lived here now, paid rent and saw spring come and go, lived past the range of why and how, for those who had no wish to know. There was another poem in the same book which I wrote called Soon, which deals with that period of AIDS. I don't know if I can find it. It is in this book, I know. Oh, here we are. I shall die soon, I know. Again, words of one syllable. I shall die soon, I know. This thing is in my blood. It will not let me go. It saps my cells for food. It soaks my nights in sweat and breaks my days in pain. No hand or drug can treat these limbs for love or gain. Love was the strange first cause that bred grief in its seed, and gain knew its own laws to fix its place and breed. He whom I love, thank God, won't speak of hope or cure. It would not do me good. He sees that I am sure. He knows what I have read and will not bring me lies. He sees that I am dead. I read it in his eyes. How am I to go on? How will I bear this taste? My throat cased in white spawn, these hands that shake and waste. Stay by my steel-ward bed and hold me where I lie. Love me when I am dead and do not let me die.
So after these intense poems and with the whole world talking about you for your wonderful ode to San Francisco and your amazing poetry, you come and write a 1,000+ novel about India in the 1950s, about punching politicians and slightly effete young handsome men and a woman in the middle of it, a young woman in the middle of it all trying to choose her life partner. So this mammoth leap you took from, Chinese poetry and a book on San Francisco to this. What made you take this leap? What was the story that was like a kida in your heart for so long?
Sort of beneficent kira, maybe a glowworm, or jugnu, or a firefly perhaps. I was partly homesick, and partly I knew I didn't want to continue to be an economist. I just felt, after writing The Golden Gate, that I could possibly, make a sort of living out of writing. I knew it would have to be a novel, and I wanted to write about my family, basically. So I came back home. I was in my late 20s, no, in my early 30s, and I decided to sponge off my parents, which I would advise all of you to do if you need a patron or a matron or both. Home is the place where if you have to go, they have to let you in. That was by Robert Frost, I think. And so, my needs were humble. I'd have food and a whiskey with my father in the evening, and minimal clothes, and people would ask my parents, so he's sort of an economics graduate from Stanford. Now, surely, how much does he earn? And they'd say, minus 20,000 rupees a month. And so there I was, writing my book, and I thought it would take a couple of years, but that sentence that I recited, you two will marry a boy I choose meant that someone else was getting married. So the thing began at a wedding, lots of wedding guests. I got involved in all their stories, and finally I found that the goalpost kept receding. And together with the love story came the politician and the politics of the time, the land reforms, the Hindu-Muslim conflicts, the position of women in the society, how courtesans were slowly losing their patronage, and all that. So that's how it growed like Topsy. And it turned out to be 1,500 pages in its final version. That's after I had cut out 500 pages, which I thought was somewhat unnecessary.
So this book has now become a focus of a lot of speculation about what comes next. And you've learned to live with it over the last decade.
Yeah.
But do you sometimes feel that question is like an elephant in the room or on the stage, and everyone's asking you or want to ask you, when is the sequel coming?
Is that an indirect way of asking that question?
Maybe.
Maybe. Well, I was writing that book when Kunal said, "What are you doing in the next 5 days? Let's go to Arunachal Pradesh." So if I keep indulging in these what is known as displacement activities.
So should we ask all car manufacturers to stop making red cars and then steal your Jimny? Will this help?
Well, I would say it's too late, because I'm not going to allow Jimny to be stolen. She and I are kind of adhesively attached, so to speak. No, the first book, The Suitable Boy, took a long time. A Suitable Girl is taking a bit long. It's taking considerably longer, I'd say. But I'm well into it, and I'm not writing anything else. So I've heard lots of deadlines from publishers have whooshed past, and each time I've had to return the money that I took from them, which is fair enough, because I haven't produced what they expected. But now I have no bonds, and as a result I'm writing better. I have no debt, no advance to a publisher. I sit in my room with a blue duvet, the same blue duvet on which I wrote A Suitable Boy, and I use it as a kind of desk, and that's how it goes. Write your books in bed. That's what I advise. But don't smoke.
So, in the middle of all this, out came this wonderful little translation of Hanuman Chalisa. So, is it part of The Girl, or is it something that took place on its own?
This is strange. I guess everyone knows pretty much the Hanuman, or knows what the Hanuman Chalisa is. If not, let me just say it is one of the most iconic hymns or poems in the Hindi language, or the Awadhi language, you might say. It's called a Chalisa, or a 40-verser, because there are 40 couplets or chaupais in praise of Hanuman and all his various exploits. And there were 3 dohas as well, enclosing it in. Now, I translated it 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, for my own pleasure. Hanuman Chalisa is something that's always been around with us. In fact, it's probably better known than any other poem in the world other than Happy Birthday to You, or a particular Chinese poem on homesickness, about watching the moon. But I didn't show it to anyone, and once I read it at the Patna Literary Society, the Patna Literary Festival. Then my aunt, Usha Mami, who lives on the ground floor of my house, she's 91 years old, she said, "Darling, you've got to share it with people." I said, "Usha Mami, I haven't polished it. I haven't written an introduction to it. And at the moment, with all this sort of Hindu nationalism going on, the last thing I want is that it should be fuel for that kind of fire." She said, "Well, even if it's," and also I said, "It's nothing compared to the original." She said, "Even if it's a small window into it, why not? It's a great poem." So I said, "Okay." Then I was going to publish it this year. I'd written the introduction. I was going to publish it this year on Hanuman Jayanti, his supposed birthday. It's the full moon of Chet, month of Chet Purnima. Suddenly I looked and realized that would be just before the elections. So I said, absolutely no way. It'll be madness. It'll just get swallowed up and misused and so on. So I published it on my birthday in June, and I made sure that the introduction that I had written in last November would be published with it. And by your leave, I'll read that the end of that last of the introduction. I hope I have it.
I thought you had it.
Oh yeah, I do. So first I talk about the prosody and the rhyme structure and so on and so forth. But then at the end, I talk about one of my own characters in A Suitable Boy called Bhaskar, who was a very young kid who was a mathematician and loved both numbers, and he also enjoyed, like kids do, running about and taking part in plays. And one of his favorite roles was one of the Vanar Sena, the monkey army at the annual Ram Leela in the town of Brahmpur. So I wrote, I dedicate this translation to Bhaskar, who learned the poem before he was 5, but who spent his 50s fighting the chauvinism and intolerance to which this and many other well-beloved religious texts and rituals have been put. Nothing could be further from the humanity and inclusivity of the best of Hinduism than the self-aggrandizement and willful cruelty of those who use the religion in which, in the lottery of life, they happen to be born, in order to attack or demean others. May the Hanuman Chalisa continue to spread joy, expand imagination, and give strength and solace to its many past and future readers. But I had great fun translating it. For example, I wanted to keep the rhythm and the rhyme so that that incantatory effect of the Hanuman Chalisa would be maintained. So something like... it
could be the first line.
The first few lines, yeah? Okay.
That everyone knows, even here.
Exactly. Like, Jai Hanuman Gyana Gunasagar, Jai Kapisa Tihu Loka Ujagar. So that I translated as, Hail Hanuman, great wisdom's ocean, the three worlds glow with your light and devotion. And so on. It went like that all the way to the final Doha. Pavanatanaya Sankat Haran Mangalamurati Roop, Ram Lakhan Sita Sahit, Hriday Basahu Surabhoop. Son of the wind, crisis dispeller, blessed form I implore, with Ram, Lakshman and Sita, dwell thou in my heart's core. That's the style of the thing.
So was the challenge in keeping that amazing tempo of it?
Yes. English doesn't have a lot of, like, English is more like ta-tum, 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 and Hindi is more tum-ti, tum-ti. So it's a falling rhythm, and it's like to be or not to be is English. And Hindi is jai, so it's, and English is quite poor in these rhymes like ocean, devotion, feminine rhymes, so-called. So that was one of the challenges. By the way, in England, the house I bought there was the house of George Herbert, the great Anglican, I think to my mind, the greatest Anglican poet ever, greater than John Donne. And I don't know what business the church had to sell, selling his house to to pay off their financial debts. They made some bad investments in the 1990s. So that's what they did. I was, and other people were the beneficiaries. I bought it, and his little church just across the way, where he wrote some of the most, anyway, he preached his sermons. He died very young at the age of 39. And I felt his presence there for a long time and wrote a number of poems in his stanza forms, in his style. I mean, India is very lucky. We have a tradition of Hinduism. We have the tradition of Islam. We have the tradition of Judeo-Christianity. We don't really have the Sino-Japanese tradition. But we have 3 of the 4 most populous traditions in the world. And what madness it is that we should be reducing our access to the wealth of the world by saying, oh, this is Indian and that is not Indian. Let us not be foolish.
I think on that note, we can take 2 questions.
I think we may have exceeded our time. Let's take 2 questions. Democratically, one from the left and one from the right. Yes, I can see one hand up. If you can't hear the question, I'll include it in my answer. Oh, there's a mic. Good.
We'll be taking 2 questions.
Just 2.
So, firstly, I'm a big fan of your poems. And, obviously, as a writer, you might experience things like writer's block, very famous, being thrown around these days. What moves you back to the writing desk when you're,
The question of writer's block and what moves me back to the writer's desk. As I said, I don't have a writer's desk. I have a writer's duvet. But let's take that as given. If I'm stuck, I can't speak for other writers. If I'm stuck and there's a kind of a wall, a plot wall I can't get through, or I can't visualize what will happen next in the novel, then I don't just give up. I try to batter the wall, knock it here, try to pole vault over it, or get around it, or dig under it. But if it doesn't succeed over a longish period of time, then I'll put it aside and try to do something else. Occasionally that works. It may not even be writing a poetry. It might be just listening to music or traveling to the northeast or something. But in fact, there are a number of my manuscripts which have not succeeded in being resuscitated or revived. In that case, my economic hat comes on and I say, sunk costs are sunk costs. Or consider the opportunity costs of wasting more time doing this when you could do something else. So that's how I deal with it. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for that answer.
And the last question from this side, I think. I'll ask a question. I'll point to a random person and ask for a question from there. Yes, the gentleman or the lady in the white hat over there. Your turn to ask me a question. Yes. So, oh, sorry, a gentleman. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay, yeah, if you like.
Let me start by saying it was a pleasure hearing you talk.
That's why I selected you.
Right. So I guess what I want to know was how at this age you're still traveling and you're still living life to the fullest, it seems. And are you still, is that what inspires you to write? Is that like writing, you said, you started with saying that writing was a passion for you.
Yes.
But at this age, like a lot of people stop writing at a certain point,
It just came to my realization that after a very insightful session on melodies, now we'll be having a very interesting session, but in the world of thrillers. And I'm particularly interested in this one as well. And for our next session this afternoon, it explores a thrilling tale of underworld crime and corruption. But first of all, can I please have Mr. Rupam Kapoor as well as Ma'am Richa Kulkarni to please proceed to the stage. For this session this afternoon, it will be a discussion for the next 30 minutes on the underworld crime of corruption, on the underworld with regards to crime and corruption, set in the gritty world of customs enforcement and smuggling, through a compelling lens that examines not only the fight against organized crime, but also the moral dilemmas faced by those on the front lines, told through the eyes of a young customs officer. For this session, we are graced by Rupam Kapoor, who is an author and a senior officer in customs and indirect taxes in the Indian Revenue Services, with a strong academic background in English literature, having completed his graduation and post-graduation at Delhi University. Mr. Rupam Kapoor combines his literary passion with a career in the civil service. And in conversation, we are joined by a young civil servant, a former Indian Revenue Service officer of the 2021 batch, and presently an IAS officer of the 2023 Assam Meghalaya cadre, streamlining this discussion on the world of facts, fictions, and thrillers. Let us have a round of applause for Mr. Rupam Kapoor and Ms. Richa Kulkarni. The floor is yours, sir, for the next half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I hope all of you are enjoying the session so far as much as I have. As our host said, it has been a very interesting journey. We had a travelogue, then we had a very lyrical discussion on indigenous lullabies, and now we are on to a crime thriller. So once more, I would like to welcome Rupam sir to Shillong and to this session. Right. So, sir has already been introduced. I would just like to add that sir is also a postgraduate in English literature from Hindu College, University of Delhi. And he's worked in a diverse range of positions in the course of his career, of course, particularly in anti-smuggling formations and tax enforcement wings. Sir retired this year, and Hour of the Hounds is his debut novel, and I'm sure more are soon to come. Now, the novel, of course, is set in the early 1990s, as was introduced, based on the exploits of Prakash, a rookie customs officer who sets out to dismantle the world of smuggling, particularly drug smuggling, in the underworld, and in doing so, challenges the biggest dawn of the underworld. Now, what happens after that in this novel, which is set on the western coastline of India, where Sir has spent a lot of time working, is that he ventures deeper and deeper into this world of crime and smuggling. And as he sets out to discover the complex relations and interests that inhabit this world, and as he understands the complexity of the ecosystem that he is trying to dismantle, so does the reader. We'll discuss specific aspects of the book in a few minutes, but now we'll move on to our questions. So, firstly, sir, I think Facts and Fiction is a very apt title for this book, because while reading, the main question that the reader is left with is how much is fact and how much is fiction. Because, of course, Sir has been very ideally placed with an unprecedented level of access for any writer to have to the reality of these situations. So is the fact enhancing the fiction, or is it the other way around, sir?
Thank you, Richa, for the introduction. Thank you for the introduction. And as Richa said, what an interesting shift from a travelogue to lullabies and now to the world of chase. And I think the audience would really, really be challenged to shift, to have that shift of mood. But before I start answering your question on fact and fiction, I think I need to put a disclaimer. Whatever I say may not be the truth, may be the truth, but mainly because the protagonist has two girlfriends. And if I say it's all fact, then my wife is sitting out here. And it's going to be a very challenging session after this session itself to answer what exactly is the truth. But coming on a more serious note, you know, Richa, when an author goes to tell a story, his primary aim is what Coleridge sometimes said for poetry, but it stands good for any author, which says that when you're reading a book, there should be a willing suspension of disbelief. Now, that willing suspension of disbelief essentially says that an author, when he's telling a story, the reader should believe in it. He should say, yeah, it's a credible story. It's a story which can be believed in. And while there have been authors who have, mainly sci-fi authors, of course, but sci-fi we don't believe in, but we have a range of authors who came up with absolutely imaginative stories from which at times challenged belief and still made you believe in them, or you were totally engrossed in them. And they were those kind of thriller authors we had, the Ludlums of the world, or even a lot of them. Alistair MacLean, you read his book and you said, yeah, this is possible, although at times you say, is it really credible? This is, and when as a bureaucrat you write, and particularly when you have been pursuing a career which is not primarily literary, how do you go about it? How do you go about it? Because you can only write. You can't research as well. I think one of the leading bureaucrats who is now out with his 4th book recently said in an interview that I researched for my book across the country. I had Google. But I'm very sure that getting to the facts which you know make that story more credible. So to answer, part of it is certainly true, may not be, but these are the stories which we picked up when we were younger and we were working on the coast, on the western coast, with the 6 of us who right from Bhuj going down till Mangalore. And we used to compare stories, we used to compare our activities, we used to compare what's happening on the coast. So they may not be stories, these are stories which have become legends in the Department of Customs, they have been carrying. But then stories standing by itself are only that. Those are facts without the embellishments. And unless you embellish it, what the authors or what the English literature or the teachers tell you to tell an interesting story, is that somehow or the other you have to flesh out the characters, flesh out the characters, F-L-E-S-H out. You have to give them a certain character, you have to give them certain idiosyncrasies, you have to give them certain approach, how does he approach life? And for me, that was what makes a book intense. That is how intense author's feelings, the protagonist or the other participants in the novel, their intensity is. So yes, the 4 main movements of the book, which starts on the western coast in Dapoli, and then it goes across to partly in Jamnagar, it goes to Mumbai. Those events were certainly all true, may not be in totality as they were told, but they have all been embellished. They have all been embellished because what we also call the new generation, that is a creative non-fiction. The creative non-fiction is, unless you may be telling a non-fiction, you may be telling a story, you may be telling fact, but unless you are able to embellish that fact, you can't tell a story which is interesting to the people. This is what has been done in this book. Certain facts have been taken, they have been embellished in a major way, particularly to ensure that they don't become just a narrative. I'll tell you a small one on this story. When I first started writing this book back in 2000, the stories were there. But day in and day out, as you would be doing now, we were reading files and making annotations and notings. And I wrote about 70 pages of it. And very proudly, I went and gave it to one of my seniors, read it and tell me how good it is. And his wife came back. She says, it looks like a note sheet of a government office. And that is where I realized, what am I doing? I have to change that particular aspect. And then it took that another 20 years to come out with this. Thank you.
Right, sir. So if anybody would like to understand some of the true events as well as what's called the embellishments in the story, I would strongly advise you to pick up the book, Hour of the Hounds, and a personal advice is to pay special attention to the cover art. A lot of thought has gone into it, as sir was telling me sometime before. So sir, moving on to another aspect of the book, I think one unusual and very unique choice that you made was to have a lot of literary references in the book. If I may call it that, there are a lot of literary Easter eggs that are just peppered throughout the narrative. And it's not necessarily what one expects in thrillers. One looks to a thriller generally to have a fast-moving plot and to just go from page to page and see what's happening. But there is a very visible influence of the literary movement, particularly of the Romantic poets, in your novel. So what prompted that choice, sir?
That was a twister, Richard. That came as a surprise. That means you have really read, Richard really read through the book with the intensity with which it was written. I would go back to the last session. artist, the song when it came out was so intense. And that was literature combined with music which came out. When we go to dance forms, we always say, I'm not a dancer myself, but whatever I read of it, that there are only 28 mudras or 13 mudras or 108 mudras. And these mudras are then combined together in various forms to come up with a particular sequence. The sequence may change. In fact, when we were kids in college, we used to say that everything which was worth written has already been written. You can only possibly twist it and present it in a slightly different manner. It is something like that. There have been great authors before us. There have been great writers before us. And when you are doing your English literature, when you are reading about them, some of them have left a lasting impact on you. You talked of the romantic poets. Prakash, the protagonist in the book, is leading his life with a passion and intensity. And that is what attracts other people to him. Right. Passion, intensity, and the dominance of spirit, which is essentially the concept behind this book. That how can passion, intensity, and the dominant spirit overcome the odds which you may face, runs through the book, as you rightly said. And at times, I just felt that the authors who have come before me, particularly the poets, although there were prose also, I didn't use that one, but one of the lasting influences was, this in Gone with the Wind, Vivian says that unless you have lost your reputation, you never realize what a burden it was, or what freedom really is. Right 60 years after that, or 50 years after that, Chris Christopher sang a song saying, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Now, two different authors saying that same thing in two different styles, but with the same intensity. Who am I to overcome or to change that masterpiece which has been only created? I think it's right way if I have to express a particular feeling, and Prakash has intense feelings. If you go through the book, Prakash's life is governed by certain principles which he has imbibed through his school, through his college, through his readings. And then he is trying to live them out. And when he is living them out at a point of crisis, or a point of when a relationship is at its inflection, he finds it easy, or I rather found it easy, to express it through some things which had already been said before. Because they had been said so beautifully that I could not have anyway improved it. And just thought that the things which had really taken me across, probably lasted in memory for more than 50 years, others should also enjoy the same things which I had enjoyed, with the same intensity with which I had enjoyed. That was the idea behind this. I hope it didn't stick out like a sore thumb, and it carried on the story as it was supposed to carry on, and continued in that same mode.
Right. Absolutely. I think it was an unusual choice and a very fortunate one for the reader. And I believe it is said that all writers first and foremost have to be readers. So I'm sure that at least on that criterion you have done very well, sir. So another major theme of the book is that the narrative is pushed forward by these 6 diverse characters who slowly come together and work to accomplishing a common goal, even when their individual interests and individual necessities are not necessarily equally aligned with that goal. So it leads to a very interesting question of why people come together in that way. And so I would like you, sir, to specifically maybe talk about that, but also talk about people coming together in general to achieve goals, whether it is in any field of life.
Thanks. Okay. So for the people, I think majority of the audience would not have read the book so far. It was basically on the western coast that it was based, and it has got 6 diverse characters. A young civil servant, who's the civil servant's kind of a mentor, who is his junior in the service, but who is a senior in the school. A girlfriend who comes from a royal background and still sticks around from a boy who has just come from a boys' school into the libertine atmosphere of Delhi University of the 80s. A police officer who's ready to break rules to achieve, quote unquote, I won't say a right thing, but objective. And 2 juniors who are ready to sacrifice their lives for the protagonist, that's Prakash. This question, in fact, has come up before, and that's again surprises me because this came up because there was a discussion going on between one of the writers who was trying to adapt this book for the OTT. And he asked me a simple question, sir, how do you say, what is the motivation which brings these six people together? Because they're all from diverse background. And we kept on exploring this particular aspect. What brings people together? Is it their value system, which they have imbibed over the years from their childhood? And the value system with, again, quote unquote, morality? Is it a loyalty which is bred out of a faith in each other? Is it a common objective which brings them together? Or is it really an inner feeling, what some may call inner compass? That inner compass which is not just limited to the values, but goes beyond the values into a deep-rooted culture which prevails in an organization, in individuals, or in the growth particular areas. In my book, I think we have explored this relationships in depth, and whether it is, I don't know whether it lasted to be a thriller or not, but these 6 people, when they got together, they had one common objective. That is to bring down the biggest underworld don who was dominating the western coast in that particular era. But that was an objective. That objective does not bring diverse people together and then motivate them to break rules. There has to be something beyond. And I think that beyond is their faith in each other, that what we are aiming for is something which is right. That faith towards that belief towards right is something which brings them together. And I personally believe that when I was writing, somewhere back in the background was their original background which they came from. Like Kabir says, we are together because we cleared an exam together. Maybe yes. Somebody came up and said, no, we are together because they are loyalty. But then I think the key part which was there was stated by Shabnam somewhere in the end, where she says, I am with Prakash because he lives his life with a passion, with an intensity, with a belief. He will fall, he will come back again. And when you die 1,000 deaths every day, and then you resurrect yourself, I think you have lived your life. I think all of them got together because they were trying to live life with a passion and intensity, which I think we all look for. That is what my take. I don't know what your take on that particularly will come from.
I think that's a very profound explanation of what brings people together.
I know, but whether it works in thriller, I don't know.
I think it does. I think it does.
Yeah, the intensity which you think of in a thriller, thriller is supposed to be a caper, but it's supposed to move from event to event. I did write a slightly different one where I tried to bring in a complex relationship into a thriller. It's for the reader to really judge whether it works or not works.
Right. In my opinion, it does, and I'm sure the definition of thriller is, to even some slight extent, being redefined. And I'm sure in your subsequent books, we'll see more and more of this theme being explored. continuing that thread of Prakash, sir, so this character, the protagonist, is several times it's mentioned that he's inexperienced, he's a rookie, his seniors call him stubborn. One word that comes up very often is nincompoop. And yet he succeeds. And I think primarily because the right people want to help him at the right time, and there's something about him which makes people want to help him. So how did you conceptualize this kind of protagonist, sir, who is shown as very flawed, as heroic as he might believe himself to be? The narrative is very clear that he has his flaws and all of the things I mentioned, and yet somehow he manages, when it's really important, to capture help and assistance from the right people. So how has this come about?
Yeah, I think he was an anti-hero. Totally agree with you. Prakash is someone who is not really, who is just out of college, and he had certain very strong principles which he had imbibed in his college and school before that. And when you are, as an individual, as I told in the beginning, this story was conceived back in 2000. I was 10 years into the service then, and everything was an adventure for me. I was out there on the sea alone. I would go to a place and find that one of my officers working singly with the next civil point of where there was, we never used to get bread where we were posted. If you would get bread in a week, once in a week, that would be great. My officer was about 40 kilometers away from the next place where you could buy atta even, and that kind of a thing. They were all living alone, and they were all living, they were all out there in a belief that no, what we have been given a duty, we will do that duty. And for Prakash, it was an adventure. Instead of being this thing, it was an adventure because every time he stepped out, he felt, what am I doing? He said somewhere, he writes a letter to his girlfriend, you know, what I'm doing is something what James Bond does, except that I don't get the girls. And yes, I'm sticking to the old, and you don't get cigarettes also over there. Prakash became the anti-hero because he was lost. Most of us, in fact, for all its criticism and its faults, as a bureaucrat, I would say that the life which a young bureaucrat faces is one of the most challenging things which is ever experienced by an individual. Most of the bureaucrats who come out, they come out as youngsters straight out of college, and then thrust into a decision-making capacity which would affect a large number of people. When you look into that particular aspect, at times either you can be very confident that and believe that I'm right, but I think any person who believes that he's always right is more of a fool than anybody else. So it is something you will have to, you need explore, and when you are exploring, you may turn indecisive. That is what happened with Prakash. Prakash, when he was trying to look into it, what am I supposed to do? He would run left, he would turn right, he would go straight, without knowing whether it was the right decision which he was taking at that particular point of time. He was lucky. Like most of us who will end our careers well, were lucky because you will have great mentors. And that is what happened with him. He had 5 people around him, or 3 people around him. So Prakash is often the weakling because he would postpone taking a decision. And that becomes the anti-hero of the thriller novel. Because the anti-hero, who is not supposed to be the hero in a thriller novel, is supposed to be running here, catching this guy, taking a decision, shoot somebody else, take him into this thing and emerge victorious. Prakash emerges victorious not because of his actions. Prakash probably emerges victorious because, as I said in the beginning, of his value systems. Those value systems brought people to him and told and guided people and led people to tell him, okay, you are doing something or you're not doing something. But even if you're not doing something, if you do it this way, possibly you will succeed. You remember one of the lines in the beginning says, among the things which you have done, not done, and plan to do, lies something that lies the mistake which you have done, and which led to this particular conclusion. Now that's as confusing as what happens over here. As confusing because, yes, the things we do, the things we don't do. But finally, we have some great people who would form a team and leads you through. That team may be ready to break rules. That teams may be able to guide you. My take is Prakash is the anti-hero with an absolutely great set of value system which draws people to him and leads them to help him out at every stage.
I hope all of us who are...
I think that was the most confusing answer which I possibly came up with, but that is my book. When we started, I was talking to this thing, and most of the books which we come across. Sorry to interrupt, Richa, to continue on that particular aspect. I'm a big fan of an author called Dick Francis. He's the guy who wrote about 30 mystery novels. And his characters fall down and come back again and again. His characters, they will say that I will succeed over here, and then they are beaten up. And he picks himself up and follows the track till the time the whole thing is unraveled. This is precisely what happens in the book, because for the people who have not read, Prakash is beaten at every stage. But he was lucky, beaten at every stage by the antagonist. It's still a thriller. And it's only in the last 50 pages that he actually forms that team which brings the antagonist down. And that is where her question comes from. Why is Prakash failing again and again? The underdog coming back. Does he remain an underdog, or he really becomes the hero at all at any stage?
Yes, I think it's this very anti-hero nature of his that makes him a very appealing character. And even as the reader is progressing along the narrative and maybe seeing him make a decision that your feeling might not be best, he's going to pay for this later, you cannot help but always root for him. So in that way, a very, very good and believable protagonist. So just moving on to a more general aspect of the novel, sir. What do you think is the current scenario and the future of crime writing in India? Because I read a few articles a while ago that maybe crime writing has not succeeded as much here as it has in the West, where there's more of an established tradition. But also I think that is changing. So what is your opinion on this?
Wow. Yes. No. Yes and no. I'll say yes, crime fiction or crime thriller or thriller genre as such. In India, it's the most challenging in English. You know, when we were young, we had Colonel Ranjit, Suren Pathak, you guys you wouldn't have heard of, who were writing Hindi. And they were writing extremely good thrillers. Every railway station, every railway journey we would go on, we'll pick up a Colonel Ranjit or we'll pick up a Suren Pathak. And then if you were probably from a literature background, you would pick up The Godfather. But then, came the OTT and also came the movies where a hero in a thriller, the thriller movie, where a hero would bash up 20 people at one go. His one smash would possibly overturn a car. And that is still the willing suspension of disbelief. People believe in that. But sometime, I think, last decade, Indian crime fiction, Indian thriller, various forms, psychological thriller, crime thriller, even the legal thriller, the financial thrillers, came of their age. we had authors who were writing, and I'm mainly talking of English, I'm not talking of the Hindi or the vernacular thrillers. There were writers who came up who would write about banking scams. There were writers who would come up, who came up, who wrote psychological thrillers. Something like I Hear You, which is a psychological thriller par excellence per se. There were writers who came up on, who were writing about crime fiction, crime thrillers. But then, a more interesting development, which I was asked of in one of the earlier Lit Fest which I participated, is the new generation of bureaucrats coming up and writing crime thrillers. I'm not the first, I'm not the last on this. But in this particular one, what is happening is some of them are being adapted for OTT. These are, we have now even the established people who are writing based on facts. What I talked earlier as a non-fiction novel, which was based on certain events in the lives of certain people, certain officers, or even say, I'll take Hussein Jadi for example. Hussein Jadi would take up a whole charge sheets and convert it into a novel. On a similar basis, he now moved on, he came out with his first novel, which is a fictional novel. The crime thrillers per se, I think, is picking up in a big way in India. The feeling of whatever be the two reasons, the two primary reasons we used to believe in for the thrillers, that is either the losing ourselves into the excitement or the catharsis feeling, either the two. In both the cases, the readers are picking up, except that we still have a challenge where the publisher normally asks you, yeah, I want a 65,000 word crime thriller. I mean, if you cross 65,000 words crime thriller, the publisher says nobody is going to read it. We are hoping, at least I am hoping, I write 90,000 word novels, and I don't believe to bring them down to 65,000 words. I do believe that the reader is getting discerning enough in India to pick up books which are more in the John Le Carre genre as much as in the Alistair MacLean genre which is running. So that's by this thing I think the Indian thriller has really picked up on the psychological front. On the psychological thrillers, we have really good writers at this stage. And the crime fiction is now picking up again in this particular decade.
Thank you, sir. I hope in the future we see Prakash maybe come to Shillong for one of his postings and see what he can do here. Although it's hard to imagine that such a city as pretty and vibrant as it is, especially today, can have a dark underbelly. But who knows what you can come up with, sir.
I know, Richa. This thing is Northeast is with this extreme vibrance, extremely vibrant culture, extremely vibrant nature, the most challenging terrain, I think, which is there bordering 3 countries,
right.
Has its own challenges and its own underworld, which can be the crime thriller, which can be explored. But I don't know how come so far nobody has come out writing on this particular aspect. Although in The Family Man, I believe the OTT thriller,
yes.
Well, the next one was coming to the Northeast,
Okay.
if I remember correctly.
Okay. Great. I think due to the paucity of time, we'll have to wrap up our session. Maybe we can take one question? Anybody has one?
If there are any questions, perhaps we can ask one question, and
we can
for
take,
any additional questions,
we can take them outside.
They can be raised at the book signing.
So first of all, a big salute to you, because I'm a government employee myself, and I can truly relate to how you said that, initially someone told you that it looks like a note sheet. So we all get caught up in the mundane routine of affairs. So if you could give some tip to how, being in service as well, we can pursue writing, that would be really helpful, sir.
Yeah, writing has to be a passion. It is something which is I move in the circle of writers, and whereas Gulzar Sahab I met sometime in 1996, 97, and he just said a simple thing: if you believe you have a story to tell, get up at 4 in the morning, sit on your table by 4:30. There will be days where you will not produce even a page. But there will be days when you will produce 5 pages and you would come up so satisfied, treat it as a job between 4:30 and 7:30 in the morning before you leave for the office. And that's your second job which is there. That's 3 hours. It takes you about half an hour, 45 minutes. In my case, at least, it took me, I don't know what about the others, half an hour, 45 minutes to simply blank out. Unless you blank out the office from your writing, you will never be able to take office out of your writing. And that 45 minutes, beyond that, it's a couple of hours you get. There are days when the creative juices really flow well. I have had days, 6, 7 days where I have not produced half a page. And then one day suddenly I'll produce 5, 6, 7 pages. I think you have to treat it as a second job, as a second passion. That's something which gets you on the table at 4:30 in the morning. That's the only thing I can suggest. That's my personal experience. Other authors may have a different experience on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And as mentioned, if there are any additional questions, they can be taken up at the book signing. But firstly, as a token of our appreciation, we would like to felicitate our speaker with a memento for the Shillong Literary Festival.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now delve into a fascinating session that traces the historical roots and modern transformations of Assam through the lens of its rich and complex past. Titled Writing Northeast India, a historical perspective on modern Assam, this session invites us to explore the intricate interplay of history, ecology, politics, and society that has shaped the region. We are joined by Dr. Arupjyoti Saikia, a renowned historian and professor at IIT Guwahati, with fellowships at Yale, Cambridge, and SOAS. His acclaimed works include Forests and Ecological History of Assam, A Century of Protests, and The Unquiet River. His research, honored with awards like the Shrikant Dutt Book Prize, vividly narrates Assam's history, intertwining its environmental, political, and cultural legacies. In conversation with him is Dr. Kaustubh Kumar Deka, a doctoral candidate from Jawaharlal Nehru University, whose research focuses on the dynamics of student movements in Assam. With an extensive background in ethnographic fieldwork and policy analysis, he brings a nuanced perspective on the region's evolving identity. Together, they will unpack Assam's historical trajectory, offering insights into how its past informs its present and future. This promises to be an enlightening exploration of the unique place of Northeast in India's narrative. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Arupjyoti Saikia and Dr. Kaustubh Kumar Deka to the stage.
So after some really interesting sessions on starting from folklore, some bit of music, and also the last session on thriller, now we are in a very interesting spot. And both of us, for sure, me, I don't know about Professor Khoikia, but we definitely feel like a bit of an outsider here, being two people from social science, because, you know, the whole domain that talks about literature is very interesting, that how history is placed here. After all, I remember here the famous saying by the American critic and writer Henry James, who said that it takes a great deal of history to produce a little bit of literature. So, I mean, those type of context, of course, there, and also we go by the iconic British historian E.H. Carr, who talks about history as the long struggle of men and a continuous dialogue of the past with the present. So I think this is the context that definitely calls for a very nuanced and rigorous engagement with history also in forums such as this, because history in our region especially, it has a special significance. It is the very premise on which our even literary imaginations and other forms of social imaginations are placed. So from that vantage point, I think it is a very absolutely apt guest that we have here, Professor Khoikia, whose work, some of which our presenters already discussed with you all. But his most recent book, which has, I think, come out about a year ago now, last year, August, it came out, that is The Quest for Modern Assam, a political history, which is being rightly hailed as a magisterial work, a comprehensive history, which has been praised by a lot by critics and also adored by readers alike. And in this comprehensive book, of which we will discuss more, Professor Khoikia takes us to a very, very long, comprehensive journey. But before we get into some of the details of the book, what I would like to ask you is that, I mean, since we are talking about so many different dimensions of understanding Northeast India also in today's previous discussions has thrown up many interesting dimensions, how do we place our sense of history in this larger context? Because as we know, Northeast India as a category, either of imagination or policy making or as a lived reality, is an outcome of a contentious history. It comes through a lot of disruptions as well as a lot of assertions. In your book, the first chapter, that is, if I remember, An Empire in Disarray. So you definitely take it as a very interesting point of departure, perhaps. So how do you inaugurate, or how do you get into this journey as a historian, as someone who wants to bring historiography into this understanding?
Right. First, let me acknowledge my gratitude to the organizers, because to be a historian and amidst the literary people, it is not an easy job. And thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Kostov, for framing those questions. I think while we study this region, it is really a difficult task. What kind of history we will write, for whom we would be writing, and what should be the point of departure. And I'm sure the students in Meghalaya, or students in Nagaland, or in Mizoram, or Manipur, or Tripura, or say in Arunachal, or in Assam, everybody would look forward to think of a different kind of lineage and different kind of trajectory. Most of our historical writings are largely dominated by the political discourse, right? We largely tend to think about the political developments that had taken place probably in the last few decades or probably in the last few centuries, right? My take is, my preference would be always over a long time period. I like to be at the august company of the geologist, for instance, who like to think about long time, maybe 1,000 years, or maybe more longer. And it is not an easy job to visualize probably what my forefathers say some 1,000 years before, how they were thinking, how they were negotiating probably a cold wintry night, in the absence of light, in the absence of all kinds of modern technologies, and how they were progressing and thinking and making life, right? To visualize the history of these regions, or where we were located, history is obviously about the past, right? It is truly a difficult task. The kind of history that we will write, for whom we would be writing. And personally, I feel that historians must learn the art of a novelist or a short storyteller, because we must write to a reader, wider reader, and try to comprehend and visualize that situations. Say 1,000 years before, or say 500 years before. What kind of, for example, plants were here? What kind of timbers were here? What kind of monsoon patterns were here? Right? These questions need answer, and to visualize them, it is truly a difficult task. the history writing for the northeastern India are not yet well informed in that directions. We largely talk about the political developments of the last, say, 50 years or last 70 years, 80 years. This is what we largely think about. But those political developments do come and do go away. The serious imprints of, say, the long economic developments, or say the larger environmental developments, which will have serious impact on this region's economy, polity, and the future, these are hardly talked about. The classic examples would be that of the earthquakes. The greatest earthquake that this region has produced, or say this region had suffered, is that of the 1897 earthquake, where this particular location where we are sitting now, it underwent dramatic transformations. But these are largely aesthetical transformations that that earthquake of 1897 had produced. But that earthquake of 1897, probably few other earthquakes, which are probably gigantic earthquakes, which had tormented the earth, tormented the mountains, tormented the rivers, tormented the non-humans, they needed to be understood. And this requires a long and comprehensive understanding. I'll summarize my answer. Our historical understanding of these regions would be successful in two ways. If we take a larger geographical framework, it would be unwise to study only Brahmaputra Valley or even say the plateau of Meghalaya. We need to bring everything combined. We need to see that this region is located between Bay of Bengal and the rising Himalayas or the Patkais into the east. That time period needs to be considered seriously, and we need to talk to many kind of archives. It cannot be one set of archive. It cannot be mere folklore. It cannot be mere colonial archive. It has to be a comprehensive archive. Probably we'll be able to tell a larger story, and this requires institutional, individual, and societal engagement, and everybody has to come together to think about that. This is how I would like to locate my region's history.
Let me take you up on the point, 2 points particularly. One about that how history is a kind of a craft of storytelling, right? I mean, on that point, you also mentioned about different types of archive. What I would like to know more from you is that this issue of, the trans-border nature or the spatiality, which is very fluid, which used to be very fluid. In your work, perhaps you talk about colonialism and the transformative experience of the two great wars, especially the Second World War, as acts of disruptions or point of disruption. Now, how do we recover those kind of lost aspects? One indication in your book, which is of course a very voluminous book, which runs into almost 900 pages, out of which about maybe 200 to 300 of them are only different references and sources, archival sources that you mentioned. Can you tell us more about the different explorations of archives that we see that can address that issue of that aspect of transboundary aspects? Because if I remember right, it was the historian Sugata Bose who said a very interesting thing in another context, that the most of the frontiers that colonialism talked about is in fact no frontier at all. They were very heart of many continuums. They were in fact highways, the highways which were transformed into frontiers through the violent experience of colonialism. So how do we get back to those, the sense of connectivity and those, those arterial notions that we had? So what type of archives will help us in that?
I would like to give my answers in two parts. First, the kind of archives that this region's historians or academicians should engage with, and the kind of connections. I begin with the connections. The most A fitting example would be the living breeze from Meghalaya, the rubber, Ficus elastica. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the story of Ficus elastica or the living breeze. You know, the gum or the resin that the Ficus elastica produced, it was hugely in demand in England, in other Western European economies since the mid-19th century, the gum and the resin. It was increasingly used in the increasingly expansive automobile industry, especially in London from 1860. So right from the 1820s onward, 1830s, the Ficus elastica gum, which was found largely in the Khasi Hills, Patkais, and the modern Arunachal Pradesh, this gum was collected by the local people and it was made into a commodity. It was sold to merchants in the mid-19th century, especially the Marwari merchants, who would collect it diligently, and they would essentially gather it as a sellable commodity for the European market. It was a very complex, a very serious process, because you have to negotiate with the local collectors. For example, the Garu community, they had serious interest and expertise in the collection of this resin. Once this was collected, this would go via complex transport network to Bengal, reach either the Chittagong port or that of the Calcutta port. From there, they should make their onward journey via Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean, and further journey to the European market. It produced huge wealth. Some of the mid-19th century profit for the local entrepreneurs, both Assamese, Marwari, and others, and also Europeans, it came from the trade in this Ficus elastica. So was the limestone in the Khasi Hills. So was the timbers, the elephants, everything was collected, it was sourced, and it would be channelized. Now the question is, all those transactions would be noted, discussed, and it will be recorded in various archives. It would not be in one set of archive, not only in Shillong, it would be different places. The best or one of the final set of where these transactions or where these materials are going from, say, Khasi Hills, Naga Hills, or when I'm using the word Khasi Hills, apology because I'm using the 19th century connotations, and that the modern Arunachal Pradesh, all those commodities and their final uses will be recorded in various automobile factories of the British societies, British economies. Those needs to be now discovered and find out, right? Those uses, right? Or the Calcutta port, or the Assam Bengal Railway headquarters in Chittagong, right? Where all these records are mentioned and they are catalogued. Now, as a historian of these regions, we have to travel step by steps, right? We need to move to Burma, we need to move to China, we need to move to Calcutta, we need to move to Germany, where some automobile factories were also collecting the Ficus elastica from these regions, and also the British companies. So different kind of archives located at different locations. As you use the word, trans-border mobilities of these commodities were very important. This is one aspect to the part one of my answer. The second would be, it is only a temporary kind of archive. We need to read three different layers of archive. I would say the huge botanical archive or the huge geological or zoological archive. For example, the arrival of this cherry plant. When it arrived, how it disrupted the local ecology, how it brought in new insects, right? That kind of archive also needs to be understood, and that it is only possible if we are constantly in dialogues with the other professionals like botanists, geologists, climatologists, or paleoanthropologists, right? All these varieties of archive we need to be in touch with. Our society is also oral society, right? Extraordinary power of absence of the written word, right? That needs to be also understood and comprehended carefully, but not merely by saying that we need to just mention. It needs to be understood with the help of the modern linguistic science, modern the paleoanthropologists, right? All needs to come in to support our cause. And finally, the literary archives, right? The sense and sensibilities of these regions are very carefully captured by our powerful literary traditions, and this festival is a symptomatic of that. And finally, all the official archives. I think this is how we need to. Finally, these archives are not located within India. They are in Burma, they are in Chile, they are in China, they are in other places of the world. They need to be understood comprehensively.
About your point about the need of more cross-disciplinary kind of dialogue across discipline, that reminds me of one small example. In one of my recent travel to the upper Himalayas, which is above in Arunachal border near Dong Valley, above Dong Valley, there was this very beautiful anecdote story that I came across. The Mishimi tribe, that is the Digaru Mishimi who stays there, they have this belief that there is a glacial lake where they go now and then, and it's in a disputed place. It's in a very militarized border. And they have a belief that that is a place for a lot of very precious flowers which grows only there. But that local belief is that if anybody plucks those flowers, there is immediate thunder lightning and the lake roars in protest. There is a sound that comes from the lake. So that is a very beautiful example of that ecological kind of a knowledge, or how indigenous belief is kind of protecting that ecology. But then again, there is also the element of geopolitics and militarization there. So you know, how those type of, I mean, that also can be certain kind of an archive when you mention oral history or oral belief or folklore, all this type of thing. But then again, how these are also now in a way party to the dynamics of geopolitics that is there, and how these places are off limit for many researchers, and how the knowledge is transmitting out despite all this militarization, but there is still lots of fluidity that is there. So that these are, in the sense, perhaps if I get you right, what you're saying is that the archive in Northeast India is still being explored. Right? It's an unfolding archive, and our sense of archive is still kind of, we are processing through that. Right? If that is how I get you. So maybe can we also bring this? And maybe let me add a little bit something more here before you come to that. I was reading this new type of work. Say there is a new coinage of a term like beyond Anthropocene. Now people are saying there is this plantation. Right? The plantation is giving rise to new forms of, history and new type of economy. Especially Anna Ching, Donna Haraway, they are coining this term. So can we also see that as a new form of historical inquiry, to see the history of plantations, how it is creating new forms of economy, new forms of imagination?
My sense is, I'll come straight to your last part of your question. The plantation story of this region is still half understood. This is largely understood through the lens of labor economics, the labor exploitations. But my sense is, and I'm fortunate to give the answer to this question, because we have not really explored the plantation archive. There are many layers of plantation archive. There is not only one. When I'm saying plantation, I'm largely talking about the tea plantation story. For example, there is also Ficus elastica plantations. There is also the sal plantations, sal robusta. There is also teak plantations. There is also this pine plantations here in Shillong, right? This was a majestic story of the late 19th century, right? Many such developments have taken place. But coming back to the questions of tea plantations, right? This was partially understood, especially the first few decades of the tea plantation, which began in the early 19th, late 1830s to the when it began, right? That story is still understood. The primary reason is our understanding of that plantation story was largely based on bureaucratic records, not the company records, not the records of the finance, right, which was at the core of this entire plantation story. The large corpus of the Assam Company records, Assam Company was the big tea company which was responsible for beginning the career of tea in the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam, right? They began their career in 1839 and they continued to be there. In 1962, they have transferred all their records, all kind of records, especially the handwritten records of the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, in running into thousands and thousands of pages to a local archive in London, not the British Library. This runs into volumes and volumes of records. And these records tells many layers of stories and challenges that this tea company had faced. I give you some example. For instance, in the initial days, the Assam Company failed to produce good tea. They were really an example of great failure in producing very successful tea at par with the Chinese tea that was produced at the time. However, the local Khamti populations, Shingpho populations, they have produced very good quality tea, very high quality tea. And the Assam Company, what it did, it basically repackaged the tea produced by the Khamti and the Shingpho populations. I'm talking about the 1830s, close to 200 years before, and sell it. And they sold this entire package material as their own product. What it did, actually, it denied the authority, their entrepreneurship, right, their culture of productions to the indigenous communities, right? Also, the various kind of negotiations that local communities did with the Assam Company, because Assam Company was the only tea company which existed till 1859, 2 years before the Sepoy Mutiny. Large numbers of people, they actually struggled to get a job there. They wanted to get a job because they thought this is a better price. Many local people, they actually struggle to work, to get a job, and a lot of migration. This is not the tea garden migration that we normally know, right? Our normal story is that the Chantali speaking populations arrived here. That is not the story. Even the followers of Islam, they started arriving in by 1840s in the tea plantations to work. But they were not given preferences because they were not good in the hoeing practices. Hoe is very important. Those archives are still unexplored. I think our institutions in Northeast, our students, our generations, our younger generations, they must take up the responsibility of reading, finding, and comprehending this archive to write our history in a different way.
Since you mentioned the Khamtis, I remember here that for the audience, Khamti people are mostly based in Namsai district in and around, and Namsai is Chokham, Namsai, these places are very interesting for two very significant colonial expeditions. One was while different European countries and powers, they were trying to get the source of the Brahmaputra. So there are expeditions were based out of Chokham. The other lesser known expedition was the attempt for the Christian missions to get into Tibet. So that is interesting because, that part we don't realize this, like we talked about this transboundary connection and spatial connections. How places like Chokham was connected to Tibet and continues to be connected, in fact. Even now there are lots of schools that teaches Pali and other languages, and there's a very subtle Tibet connection to all that. So that is fascinating, that how despite of centuries of different expositions, different cultural integration and other dynamics, that peculiarity persists. And in fact, because I come from Dibrugarh, which is very near to Namsai, in our local joke is that when you go from Dibrugarh, you enter Namsai, it is like there's a bridge. There's a Dihing River bridge. It's like if you cross the bridge, it's like you are going from South Asia to Southeast Asia, because there is immediately a different marked change in attire, in everything, in architectural design and everything. So these nuances and differences increasingly, and that will be maybe one of our final discussion, is that what type of new history I think that you see that is emerging, that is trying to capture this very kind of uniqueness, or maybe decentering the notion of history from some kind of dominant trope or dominant lens. How these type of things are being brought out, and the so-called margins and so-called borders, how they are being mainstreamized, and what are the new forms of history that you see that are coming up, or what do you think should be some new parameters that should be adopted by a set of new history writers from the region or from outside the region talking about Northeast India?
I may not have a very concrete and a clear answer, but let me try. What are the new ways that the historians of these regions are trying to understand? One of the major issues is the questions of the long history of the infrastructures. For instance, the regions has a very complex network of communications. I'm sure those of us who are familiar with the mountain pathways, roadways, smaller passages, these are very peculiar to these regions, right? And this produce linkages, connections with many kind of geographies, and connecting it to Sylhet, connecting to both Bay of Bengal, Burma, China, to Gwalpara, to Tibet, Bhutan, right? This is a source of mobility. What the British had done, they had essentially created new arteries, new infrastructures of transportations, right? Partly they succeeded in erasing the existing arteries, existing connections, but they created new infrastructures. So two of the biggest infrastructure they created in the late 19th century was the railway infrastructure. The Assam-Bengal Railway, which was one of the biggest investment of the colonial government in terms of capital investment and also profit. Then the Eastern Bengal Railway, the steamer companies, all these things were created. Anyway, many of those were also severely disrupted during the time of partitions. In fact, partition came essentially as a force of disruption of this transport network, especially the Meghalaya. Meghalaya suffered heavily due to the partitions, right? So this is one part I think many historians are looking at, the questions of frontier making, right? How the frontiers were seen, visualized. I think another third point is the history of the language. I'm not talking of the history of the language in the 20th century, but the long history of the languages, especially the Himalayan languages as they call it now, or the Indo-Tibetan, the Austric languages, the long history of the last 2,000 years, especially based on genetic studies and others. Historians are increasingly relying on that. Also environmental history. My own experience is the river. But I think the other trees also require attention and deserve notice. The story of the elephant, for example, they are increasingly being studied. I see the Northeast now provide several dimensions, especially the border studies. Your own work is essentially on the borders, infrastructures. Then the questions of where you are located, right? I think these are still new ways that this region's history, I think we have successfully come out of our initial exposure to the history of ethnicity, history of, say, religion and other things. We are going in new directions, and I'm sure we'll be able to give a new directions to the global history.
mean, as much as we would have liked to carry on this fascinating conversation, which is as fascinating as the region itself, but the organizers are giving me a signal that we perhaps have to wrap up soon, but I still bargained at least time for one question. If anybody has one pertinent question or comment, please feel free. The mic there.
Thanks for that, Kaustav and Arup Jyoti. One thing which I think emerges very clearly both from your own writing as well as how you've addressed issues here is that you're a historian of the region. You're not just a historian of Assam, you're somebody who's read your books and having reviewed the last one. It is, while Assam may be central to the work that you do, there is a huge amount of material which emerges from this very mammoth research and work on Mizoram, on the hill regions. And I think that's very important for us to understand and know. It's really a comment, I don't need it.
To very brief answer, my own expertise for a long time was largely on the lowlands, as I see it, on the valleys, because more familiar with wet rice cultivations, probably in transport infrastructures or institutions. But I think the highlands, it has a bigger role to play in shaping the destiny of these regions. In fact, my sense is, and what I have written in my The Unquiet River, the history of Brahmaputra, the hills were the preferred choices for a long period of time because the lowlands were more prone to the flood. It was not easy to take control of the production of the paddy especially. So till the time when the mountains and the highlands, it afforded a good amount of crops and other edible items, people preferred that locations. It was easier for them to also to have remained safeguarded against many kind of non-humans, right? Slowly, the lowlands became more important in terms of political activity, but I think this region's history needs to be seen as a collective unit. It cannot be a history of only a Brahmaputra Valley or Barak Valley. It has to be a history of the hills and the lowlands, also the waters together. If we can bring the history of the Eastern Himalaya and the Bay of Bengal and that regions together, including Patkai, then only I think our region's understanding would be much more clearer and better. Otherwise, it would be a regional political history.
We will be taking the last question for this session. Thank you.
Just one quick question. Today we see a lot of young historians writing history through the lens of a biography. Writing a lot of biographies about Indians who are not so well known, especially post 1947. How do you see that as a tool, especially in the context of Northeast India, where we don't have many biographies of some of the big leaders?
We don't have many things, including biographies. But I really enjoyed writing a short micro-history of the life of Sonaram Sangma. Sonaram Sangma, especially in the early 20th century, between 1904 to 1912, he really led a major struggle against the imperial forestry program. And he succeeded. It was a fascinating work, and the kind of his challenge that he faced, it was really great, but what he did, he succeeded forcing the imperial government to stop further encroachment of the forest from that of the community, and that process had stopped. Sonaram Sangma and many others, they are extraordinary figures, and I think we need more works to understand the region's history of colonialism, history of pre-modern times, everything requires. Probably our institutions, our younger generations, they will learn the local languages in more sophisticated manner. My own training in the medieval Assamese is so poor. I'm trying to learn, but it requires my expertise in many languages. Without learning the highland languages, Himalayan languages, my present understanding of even the Assamese would remain a half-done project. I'm sure the biographies would be a major way out. In fact, I have named my history of Brahmaputra a biography because it gives you the control and command over your material, what you want to write. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Deka and Dr. Saikia, for this rather nuanced and insightful session. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to present you with a few mementos. Let us please have a round of applause for our speakers. Their exploration of Assam's past, woven with threads of geopolitics, ecology, and culture, has provided us with a profound understanding of its present and future.